Making a mod for Fallout 2 is not easy, but the least documented and probably one of the most difficult parts of making a mod for Fallout 2 is the creation of a completely new critter. So I took a couple of months and figured out how to create a complete critter in Blender, including animations for all 6 directions at the same time, including converting the animations into Fallout 2's file format, then attaching it to a brand new Proto file in the game. This is a long process, but I'm betting the rest of you watching will totally find this as awesome as I did. Okay, a couple of things need to be set up before we tackle Blender. One, the mapper needs to be installed because we'll need it to capture a 640 by 480 image from it. I have a video up already explaining how to install this, so please refer to that first if you need any help. Two, some sort of image editor. I'll be using Gimp, but anything that can crop an image to 640 by 480 will work fine. 3. Frame Animator 2 by Joshua to convert what we get from Blender into the FRM format compatible with Fallout 2. I'll cover installing that in this video. The download link for it is in the description below. 4. And of course, we need Blender. Just do a search for how to install Blender if you don't have this already. There are a ton of videos out there covering this topic, so I'm not going to cover it here, at least not right now. Okay, though we use the Frame Animator software last in the process, I'm going to cover installing it first just to get it out of the way. As usual, the download link will be in the description. Installation is super simple. Just download the program archive, open it with an archive manager. 7-Zip is a good open source archive manager if you don't have one of your own already, and extract the contents to a folder that's convenient for you. I'm going to extract my copy to my Fallout 2 mod folder since I'm probably going to be using it on a regular basis. Once that's done, you can just run frameanimator.exe. If you feel like it, you can also create a shortcut for ease of access. Okay, that step is out of the way. Next, let's open up the mapper and load up a map with a few characters on it already. Ideally, we're going to use these characters to get the right size for our new creatures in Blender. There are several ways of setting up the mapper to get the right image size, but I like to use the original game resolution of 640 by 480 for my images, so you can either edit the ddraw.ini and m2res.ini files, if you're using it, to match that resolution, or you can crop a screen capture in an image editor like Gimp or Photoshop, as long as the scale is correct for your monitor. Either way will work. But first, I definitely recommend turning on hexes in the bottom left corner here before capturing the screen. This will give you a frame of reference if you want to create movement animations for your creature. Generally, walking is 2 hexes in 8 frames and running is 4 hexes in 10 frames, but I imagine other variations are fine. And to capture just the window, you hold down Alt and press Print Screen. Alright, once you've got a screen cap of the mapper with a reference critter and hexes turned on, let's crop it in an image editor. I'm going to use Gimp. As long as you pressed Alt Print Screen on the mapper, all you have to do is click File, Create from Clipboard. You'll notice up here the actual resolution that it captured is 642 by 501. That's because the bar at the top is included and a couple of pixels on either side. In order to get rid of those, go to Image, Canvas Size, change the canvas size to 640 by 480. You can tell it to recenter right here, or what would work better is to simply move the image itself up to the top, drop it down to -20 here, and then -1 here. That will recenter everything perfectly, and now you have just the image you want cropped. Go to File, Export As, title it whatever you want, click Export, and then export again. That's it, you're all set. You can close everything out. You can save this if you want, but you don't have to. So I'm just going to click Discard. Alrighty then, once you've got a screen cap of the mapper with a reference critter and hexes turned on, then cropped it to 640 by 480 in an image editor, open Blender, and let's get started setting up the basic stage for our new critters. Just like probably every other Blender project out there, delete the default cube. And then select the camera. Click this little arrow up in the top right corner and change the camera X location to 0 and its Z rotation to 0. Change the camera's X angle to 64.34109. If you're interested in where I got that random looking number, check this wiki page where one super smart modder explains how they reverse engineered the camera angle. Link should be in the description. And if you want Blender to show you all the decimal places in the location section, open the Scene Properties tab and change the units drop down from metric to none. Now that we've done that, next set the camera's Y location to -6.2445 and its Z location to 3.0000. This sets the camera view to be centered on the origin, which is by default where any creatures or items will be created. If you want a more detailed explanation of why I chose these two numbers, stick around at the end of the video and I'll explain the math. You don't have to do all that complicated stuff though, I just did it to make sure I had the camera centered properly. In fact, if we leave this formula in place for one of the later steps, stuff will start to break. So it's probably a good idea to make it a solid number now. From here, let's make a bunch of adjustments to the camera and the scene so it renders our creatures correctly. First, go to the camera settings, the green movie camera icon, and change the lens type from perspective to orthographic. Then open the background images drop-down arrow and click Add Image. Click Open and browse to wherever you saved your reference image at and select it. You don't have to, but I like to change the opacity setting from 0.5 to 1.0. That foggy look for reference images just doesn't work for me, and your creature will always be on top anyway. And if you want to look at your camera view while making these adjustments, press 0 on the number pad or go to View, Viewpoint, Camera. Next, go up to the Output Properties, the printer icon, and change the resolution to match the background image you just added. Shoutouts to Zavita for coming up with this solution. You're awesome, dude. Thank you for helping me out. Theoretically, as long as this matches the background image, you can use any size, but I feel like 640 by 480 strikes a reasonable balance between plenty of space to work with and file size on render, and Frame Animator will just remove the extra alpha pixels anyway. Use your own judgment here, but I'm using a 640 by 480 image, and the image size you're using is what you want to put in this number. Don't forget to change the output folder from temp to your personal image folder, so you don't lose track of your render. Now scroll down and open the post-processing drop-down arrow and set dither to 0. This is important because if you don't do this, when you import the rendered images into Frame Animator, you'll have an ugly mess of weird dots where the alpha channel space should be. Now, in order to render an alpha channel, open the Render Properties tab, looks like a little camera, and open the Film drop-down. There, you check the transparent box. Okay, that should be all the weird settings wrapped up. Next, let's make duplicates of this camera and position them in each of the other 5 directions. Make sure the cursor is in the center origin by pressing Shift S and selecting Cursor to World Origin. Then press Shift A and add an empty. I like to use empty plane axes, but this next step works with anything, including random shapes and objects, so you can feel free to choose whatever you want, except maybe image. Avoid image. I don't think that'll work very well. Select both the camera first and the newly added empty object second, for me it's the plane axes, by holding down Shift while clicking each one, and press Ctrl P to open the parent menu and select object. Now, if you press G to grab the plane axis or your empty object and move it around, you'll notice the camera follows along with it, and there's a little dotted line connecting the two indicating their dependency. Next, select both the camera and the empty object again, in that order, and press Shift D to duplicate them. Right-click to clear the movement selection, but don't clear the object selection. Instead, go up to the Transform toolbox in the top right and change the Z rotation to 60 degrees. Repeat this process 4 more times, adding 60 degrees each time, so we have a camera at 0, 60, 120, 180, 240, and 300 degrees. Incidentally, if you haven't already, while the driver formula works on one camera, it'll screw everything up on these copies we're making, so you'll want to change it to a solid number before doing this right now. And to finish setting up our scene, select everything, right-click anywhere on the canvas, go to the parent submenu and select Clear and Keep Transformation. Now you can grab all those empty objects, you may have to move the light source out of the way, and delete them with 0 repercussions. Now that we've got our scene set up, I'm going to import a creature so I can get things oriented for the next step. I have a generic Deathclaw model I grabbed from Sketchfab, and with the cursor set to the origin already, going to File, Import, we'll place the model at the center of our scene. Now mine is specifically an XNLR model. Yours may be different, however, work with what you have. Press 0 on the number pad and let's resize our model so it at least fits our camera. With the entire model selected, press the S key to change its size. Now, if you compare the default import angle for the Deathclaw to our reference image, you'll notice it faces straight down, which isn't really a direction any of the game characters face. My fix for this was simply to select the model and change the Z rotation to 90 degrees. Now our model facing matches our reference image correctly. If your model doesn't want to resize or change direction easily, then try this little trick. Press Shift A and add an empty cube or some other object. Press S to resize the new empty object to something reasonable, and press G and Z to move it vertically just out of our scene. Select the entire model again and then hold Shift and select the empty object. Press Ctrl P and select Object Keep Transform. Now you can move just the empty object and the model will match the direction and displacement. Okay, we've got our scene properly set up. Next, rename the individual cameras in this order. The first camera we made is looking at our model facing east, so let's rename it to camera_E. Select the next camera and press Ctrl and number pad 0 to view the scene from that camera angle. This next camera to the right has our model facing southeast, so we'll name this one camera_SE. And we go on like this for each camera. The model is facing southwest in the next one, so camera_SW, then west with camera_W, then camera_NW for northwest, and finally camera_NE for northeast. When you're done, each of the cameras should have a specific name for each direction they're showing. We're doing this for a specific reason that I'll show later on, so don't skip this step. Now, I am not an expert in Blender and I have very little experience and probably not much talent with this, so please use your own judgment when making animations and setting up your models and lighting. This is not going to be a perfect build. I'm still new to this, but I definitely think this is worth sharing now. Alright, from top to bottom, that's our scene and camera setup. Now let's render out a simple animation. Each critter in Fallout 2 has a simple idle animation where the critter stands in place and makes a simple movement. Let's make our own by animating this deathclaw to make a simple hand gesture. To do this, let's open up this lower animation window and start working on some keyframes. Most idle animations in Fallout 2 hover around 12 frames, and some are as low as 9 frames. Others are as high as 20 frames. This is one of those settings you'll need to pick for yourself, but I'm going to use 12 frames for my animation. Now, there are a ton of videos on YouTube covering animating in Blender already, so I'm just going to fast forward through this process. If you need help, I'll do what I can, but you'll probably find more helpful information by doing a search on YouTube or Google for your specific problem. Okay, we've got a nice little waving deathclaw idle animation put together. Next, we need to render it. And here's the trick, not only do we need to render this simple animation, but we need to render it in PNG format frame by frame and separately for each camera. To do this, I had to create a Python script that would cycle through each camera and render out the animation on each one, and separate them by folder based on the camera name, and in this case, the cameras are named after the direction the model is facing them. Shoutouts to Zazeth, who helped me out a lot on this. I'm not great with Python yet, but let me walk you through the code. These two add the Blender Python and OS libraries. This grabs the default render file path from Blender and stores it in the path_dir variable. This section tells Blender to run this script on each camera. This copies the path_dir variable to a variable named original file path. This one crops the end of the camera name and stores it in the camera path variable. Here, we set the file path variable to the default render path with the end of the camera name as a subfolder. Sets the current render file path to the file path variable we just made, the actual render command that renders our animation, and this one changes the current file path back to the original file path on close. Anyway, to run this, just open the scripting tab at the top, open the text menu and select new. Then copy this entire Python script into the empty document. When you're ready to render your animation, click the little play arrow at the top here. You'll probably have to give it a few minutes depending on the complexity of your model, and it's a good idea to have the destination folder open so you can see its progress. But once the script is finished, you should see 6 different folders, one for each camera, and in each folder you should find a PNG file for each frame of animation. As long as everything looks good, group these 6 folders up into another folder. Name it whatever you want, ideally something identifiable like the model name and the action, and create a text file inside this folder. This is a script for Frame Animator. The first 6 lines look through each of the camera folders we made earlier, grabs the images and opens them up to create an FRM file. The auto-cutting line allows this script to recenter the image, and the last 6 lines try to recenter the model image on the correct text for each direction. But we'll get into that in a moment. Copy this script into the text file first, then go to File, Save As, change the Save As type from text documents to all files, and save it with a .fas extension. Click Save. Next, open Frame Animator. Hopefully we won't need Blender anymore, but let's leave it open just in case. In Frame Animator, open the File dropdown and select Execute Script. Browse to the folder you just saved this script in and double-click it to run it. A couple of important points here. This script is written to run inside the folder with all of your newly rendered camera images in their own folders, so make sure to copy it to the correct folder or you'll end up making a blank FRM. Next, open the View dropdown and select Hexes. You should now see your character model roughly centered on the red hex right in the middle, but you should definitely double check each direction, because the way Frame Animator works, it crops all the excess alpha pixels and then tries to auto-center the image by measuring the remaining image width and creating a new center point based on this width. If you notice the model is off-center in a couple of directions, there are two ways of fixing this. The first way is you can click this little four-way arrow symbol in the bottom left corner here and manually move the model to what looks like a good center. Or, the second way, you can click the frames offset model and type in the distance in pixels you want to move the model on the X and Y axes. I personally prefer to type in the numbers after getting the model close to what looks good. Reason for that is usually the Y-axis will look good and the X-axis will have a problem, or vice versa, the X-axis will look good but the Y-axis will have a problem. So I'll end up wanting the Y-axis to stay the same for each direction but manually change only the X offset, and this is how you do that. When you're satisfied with the centering for each of the animations, click this little smiling Vault Boy button to create the FRM file. Choose a folder to save it in, but here's a very important point for newcomers to Fallout 2 modding. The name can be almost anything you want, but the last two letters must follow a specific naming convention. The last two letters of AA are used for idle animations. The last two letters of AB are used for walk animations. AE is climb. AG, if you want to include a special animation for it, is for wearing or taking off a robe. This actually only applies to Gorus in the main campaign, but hey, it's up to you if you want to make one. AK is to pick up, AL, use, AN, dodge, AO, receive a hit from the front, AP, receive a hit from the back, etc., etc., and there are actually a lot more on this list than what I am showing you here. I've got this whole list on a wiki page, and I'll link to it in the description. Just remember, whichever animation you're making, and whatever you name it, all the base names must be the same for the same set of FRMs, and the last two letters in the name need to be one of those on the list. The animation we just made is specifically an idle animation, so we're going to end the name with AA. When Frame Animator is finished making the FRM, it'll show up in the same folder you ran the script from. And once you have a new FRM, copy or move it to your Fallout 2 mod under data/art/critters. Once you have the FRMs named and moved to the correct folder, it's time to add them to the Critters.lst file. If you don't have Critters.lst already, run the Fallout 2 Dat Explorer and open the Critter.dat file located in your Fallout 2 game directory. Open the Art and Critters subfolders, and at the very top, the very first entry in the list is Critters.lst. Extract Critters.lst to your modded Fallout 2/data folder. This should create two folders, Art and Critters, inside that, and Critters.lst should be located inside the Critters folder. Right-click on Critters.lst and select Edit. Scroll down to the very bottom of the list and add the base name, not the full name, the base name of your new FRM series to the end of the list. Leave off the animation ID letters, the last two letters we just added. Technically, this is all you need to add to get your new FRM to show up in the Proto Manager. But you may have noticed the comma, number, and another comma followed by a 1 in a lot of the other entries. The first number represents which aim shot screen to use for this new FRM file. This is VATS for those of us who grew up with Bethesda Fallouts, and this is how it works. Each line in the Critters.lst file is numbered, starting with reserve at the top with 0. And these line numbers are used to reference each FRM on this list. Now, this number, representing the aim shot screen, or VATS, is actually referencing a line number in this Critters.lst file. Each critter has a line in Critters.lst, but not all critters have their own aim shot FRM, or VATS screen. Those that don't have their own VATS screen use other critters' VATS screens by using their number on this list. For instance, at the top of this list, HA Power, the FRM name for Power Armor, uses the VATS screen for number 21 on this list, MAMTNT, the FRM name for Super Mutants, while HA Robe, the FRM name for robed characters such as the Children of the Cathedral or the Habologists, uses number 11, HMJMPS, the FRM name for the Vault Dwellers with their blue jumpsuit. As an odd side note, for some reason, even though these two FRMs are on different models, they are actually duplicates of each other. I don't know what's up with that. Just for fun, and because we're making a Deathclaw, here's an example of the Deathclaw VATS screen, Mawclaw, number 51. I'll cover making a new VATS screen in a future video. For now, we'll use one of the common line numbers listed here, 51 for Deathclaws, and the second number, sometimes included, sometimes not, is only used to tell the engine if the critter should be allowed to use a run animation during combat. Really weird place to put combat AI settings, but okay. Now, let's get back to critter creation. Once you've added your new critter FRM to the bottom line, save and close the text file and open the Proto Manager. Open the Create Proto File menu dropdown and select Type Critter. Congratulations, we're finally at the critter creation stage. Click the General tab, give your critter a name, a description if you feel like it, and open the little dropdown box right below that orange flame guy. At the very bottom, in the same order you placed it on the Critters.lst file, you'll find your brand new critter animation. Select it, check out your idle animation in that little box, and click all the save buttons. Save name, save description, and save pro. Also, as a side note, you can add or change the default script for this critter by clicking the script ID dropdown and selecting one from the scripts.lst file. Anyway, save the Proto, close the Proto Manager, and open the mapper. Press F2 to open the critter art list, and press the N key to go to the very end of the list. The very last critter art in the row should be your new critter. Now you can load up a map or create a new one, then right-click your critter and place it on the map. Save your map when you're done, and if you feel like testing it out, run your modded Fallout 2 game after setting the correct map to load as first level, and start a new game. If everything worked right, you should see your new critter right in front of you, maybe even playing its idle animation and waving at you. That's it, or as Overseer Jacoran would say,
"You've done it,
right before kicking you out of the vault.
and you have to leave."
Of course, it looks like absolute crud, because I don't know how to use Blender very well. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a long process, but we finally got a new critter, with all 6 facing directions and at least an idle animation, and maybe a walk or run animation if you feel like taking the time to make them. If you feel interested, walk animations move 2 hexes in typically 8 frames, and run animations are usually 4 hexes in 10 frames. For extra credit, you could open the critter.dat file and extract the FRM animations to a separate folder and check some of them for a better understanding of what your animations should look like. Remember, there's a wiki link below with a complete list of the different animation naming conventions used in the game. And a lot of them are death animations, so be prepared for a lot of wacky fun work blowing up your critter. Hi, Mom! Aww. And as another side note, you may want to replace that shortcut of Critters.lst I asked you to make in an earlier video. That one points to the critter proto list from master.dat, which the Proto Manager handles nicely. Instead, replace it with a shortcut to this Critter.lst file, located in the data/critter/art subfolder. Let me go ahead and finish this up with a few things to watch out for when making new Fallout 2 models. If Frame Animator isn't giving you a proper invisible background and instead it looks like mushroom soup, double check to make sure dithering is set to 0 in the post-processing section of the Output Properties tab. The alpha channel isn't specifically necessary, but if you're having trouble getting Frame Animator to recognize the background color in your PNG files, then turning RGBA on in the Properties tab might make it easier to recognize the alpha channel. If your model is facing the wrong direction in Frame Animator when you're checking the results, double check the camera names and the folders created for each one to make sure they match the script we're running in Frame Animator. And now for that more detailed explanation on why I chose those 2 specific numbers for the camera position. I created a mathematical formula based on the angle derived earlier to adjust the height of the camera in relation to its distance from the origin. The exact formula itself is z equals negative tangent 0.4478324619728982 times the y location. And I applied this formula by right-clicking the z location for the camera and selecting Add Driver, then setting the object reference to camera, the type to y location, and naming the variable to y_location. And then I just typed the rest of the formula in. Since Blender uses radians only in its driver system, I had to convert the original angle of 25.65891 degrees from degrees to radians, which is 0.447832, etc., the number I read off earlier. To remove the driver, right-click it and go to Delete Drivers. And now it's a solid number. As usual, I have a terrible time trying to write outros for my videos. I'm not that good with Blender yet, so my models don't look great in-game, but I'll keep trying until I can get something looking good, and then I'll share the secrets. Thank you to all my awesome supporters, you guys rock. And shoutouts to all you technical experts out there. You guys in the forums and you guys in chat were really helpful in bringing this together. I hope you liked what I made here, and I hope it helps you in your Fallout 2 mod. Please smash that like button, share it with your friends and fellow modders, or even people who work with Blender. And I can't wait to see what new critters you guys and girls make for your new mod.